to work at the Financial Times, and it's a relatively progressive newspaper, but to push change through an organization like that, which is wedded, which has these great traditions that it adheres to, is very, very difficult. With the one idea, everyone says, oh, you have to pay attention to your readers. You have to be reader-centric, which is kind of a fine thing to say, but it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't allow you to prescribe any particular course of action. I think if newspapers did two things, they put page view numbers next to every single article.
Which you do on your blog posts.
Which we do in our blog posts. A measure of the popularity of every single thing that's written. Nothing more than that. And secondly, if they opened up the newspaper to reader comments, so that they can be moderated, but basically every single article should have, at the end of it, a discussion involving the readers, maybe the source of the story, maybe the reporter, something to expose what the readers think about a particular piece. I'll tell you what would happen. For something like the New York Times, the newspaper which I read, within about 6 months they would have to give up on a lot of the Albany coverage, for instance, the local political coverage. Because actually there's a very small class of people, mainly the political class and bureaucratic class, that actually cares about those stories. They would realize that that Sunday Styles was probably one of the most important franchises. All the things that they kind of ought to know anyway would become undeniable.
They have all that data now.
But by exposing it in public, it becomes impossible to ignore. The readers see it, the writers see it. The readers complain less if you cut certain areas of coverage, because you point and you say, well, look, you see that was 1,000 views compared with 1 million views for the story that we did about the Somali pirates.
Yeah, the standard argument about that is that it will become not the New York Times, but the Paris Hilton Times.
And that's probably true.
Yeah, so you have to moderate that. I mean, I think it's a very good...
It's 2009. The time for experimentation was about a decade ago.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonably clear what newspapers should do or what they can do.
So what is
right
that?
Now.
What should they do?
I think they have to cut down on their political coverage. I think they have to kind of hive off and create brands around the areas of content that actually attract readers and attract advertisers. Like, for instance, Sunday Styles, the New York Times Sunday section. Very popular, highly female audience, desirable for advertisers. That could very easily be an online brand and support itself entirely through online advertising. They don't do it. They're still wedded to the idea of the package, the entire newspaper with all these topics covered, and at the very, very center of it, national and local political coverage, for which there is no ad-supported model.
And you know, if you look at what treats the audience with a little more respect.
Actually, we should probably pass that more accurate, because, you know, let's face it, blogs are actually individually extremely inaccurate. You know, we get stories wrong the whole damn time. If I was going to be going back to your example of, you know, what it's like to be interviewed by the New York Times, the New York Times is never going to totally screw you over. The New York Times will always be relatively fair. Even if the writer is inclined against you, the editor will stop it becoming a hit piece. The New York Times doesn't really do hit pieces. On a blog, there's actually there's no one to call, there's no one to complain to, there's no ombudsman or anything like that. I think the key point is that in aggregate, the blogs get it right. Eventually they get it right. They may stumble upon it. And I think the great parallel here is actually the British press, which is actually very much more like blogs, versus the American press in the coverage of you know, where were the weapons of mass destruction after the invasion of Iraq. And I think the lag between the British press really kind of getting hold of that story and the American press doing it was somewhere between 6 and 12 months. And the British press got a lot of the stories, got a lot of the individual stories wrong. They relied on one source inside the government, on leaks, misdirection. Yeah. But in aggregate, eventually they got it right. And I think that's the future of blog-style journalism, is that, you know, it'll be messy and...
Yeah, it's the process.
Let's face it, the newspapers, when they call up an official for comment, the officials lie the whole damn time. Yeah. And if you're dependent on getting the on-the-record comment from the official, you're not going to be able to print the truth because they're not going to give you the truth. You're going to rely on, you need to be able to rely on the unofficial sources, or maybe you actually need to rely on some crazy blogger who's going to print it anyway, even without the official confirmation, and then force the official or the company into making a denial or confirming some element of the story. And so that process, maybe at the end of the day, you need somebody like the New York Times or its online equivalent to put the stamp of, this is the 100% confirmed truth.
Well, for now.
But I'm very interested in the legal aspects of print versus you guys. And you have no incubation period, so you can come out instantly. But press has to really sit back and say, well, when am I going to be sued? You don't seem to enjoy lawsuits. I don't see any. Yes. But you're not bothered by the legality of lawsuits, are you?
It's newspapers, it's permanent. So once it's written, it's committed. Anything that's actually published online can be changed and can be updated. And that changes the circumstances somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, and if there's disclosure and somebody says, we've got, this leaked memo and in our anonymous email box from a Yahoo email address, take it for what it's worth, here it is. As the audience knows, this is an anonymous tip, and they can judge it as such. And that means you're not going to really get sued. But that being said, we got takedown letters all the time for different things that were leaked to us. Everything from schematics for an iPhone or a BlackBerry that were leaked to our, journalists at the, and bloggers are sort of a subsection.
Maybe part of your success is that you're free of lawyers.
Well, we're not free of lawyers. In fact, our head of operations is a lawyer and spends most of, at least half of her time dealing with letters from people who are threatening to sue us. But let's take an example. This is kind of a positive example. The Church of Scientology, a very fearsome organization, and that had actually intimidated most newspapers. I think St. Petersburg Times ran some pieces and got sued pretty badly by them. But they pretty much scared off mainstream journalists. We ran a video of Tom Cruise, a secret internal cult video of him marketing the religion. We got the usual Scientology letters, cease and desist, threats to sue. We're not necessarily brave, but the internet collectively, the competitive pressures to get something out, even if there is a legal risk, and if you're not going to do it, then somebody else is going to do it. That collectively, the internet is a more formidable foe to people like the Church of Scientology who want to keep information quiet, than the newspapers were. Online, certainly as readers get better and the screen definition of iPhones improves. And one of the things we found is that when we started, and probably Jason would confirm this, that there was a shortage of pointers to good information online, and so we provided pointers. Blogs were basically short paragraphs with a joke or a bit of attitude and a link pointing usually to a newspaper article. And one of the things that we've discovered over the last few years is that the returns, this is not a moral imperative for us, but the return to producing original and sometimes even long-form journalism, the return has improved. Because now there's 1 million Twitter accounts, and there are all these blogs, and there's Dig, and there are all these people linking, all these people desperately looking for anything original online. And so whereas before an original piece might have gotten 10 times the page views, 10 times the audience of a throwaway one paragraph joke and a link, now probably the ratio is more like 100 to 1. And so the market is sort of starting to correct itself, and and anyone who's actually bemoaning the fate of long-form journalism should be reassured by that.
Yeah, and also
short-form blogging. And ironically, I think Twitter is probably better news for newspapers than it is for blogs. If you think about it, you've got newspapers, the average article length is maybe, let's say 800 words. You know, blogs, the average item length is 200 words. And Twitter, the average length is probably 10 words. And 10 words goes better with 800 words than it goes with 200 words. Because if you look at a Twitter feed and you click on a link and you go through to a short blog post, you kind of feel cheated, let's be honest. Whereas if it's a newspaper article, 20 words seems like a kind of pretty good introduction to 800 words. So I think actually the latest innovation in blogging is bad news for the early blogs and good news for those ancient newspapers that now have another way to pitch their stories.
It'll become, you know, I think a large portion of the traffic.
I think the blogs will do a better job of investigative journalism than Twitter. That the journalists, whether they're on blogs or whether they're in newspapers, will use Twitter as a source of ideas.
Distribution and input.
But I think the impact of Twitter, though, is also that by providing all that attitude and those quick links, they kind of force everybody else to up their game. So that it's not enough for us just to do quick blog posts. We actually have to do original stories that will get linked by Twitter. So we're being kind of pushed into doing good despite all our best intentions. Learn eventually how to deal with these technologies, but we certainly haven't yet. And you know, one of the phenomena, I think the lack of attention that people pay to people they're actually speaking to at the time is definitely an issue. I think the other thing, the other problem is that often writers, even news writers, will realize they will get so much response from anything they expose about themselves that they'll expose more. That it feeds into narcissism. We had a writer, I can say who she is because she actually wrote a big New York Times Magazine piece about this whole phenomenon, a writer called Emily Gould. And she used to complain that she had writer's block. She was a very good writer, but a pretty infrequently published writer. She started writing for us. She started writing news, but then also talking about her relationship with this guy called Joshua, who was also a writer on the site. And then he would write about his relationship with her, and pretty rapidly the whole thing got out of control. She exposed more than I think she actually wanted to. It was kind of addicting, because she would get, the more she would expose, the more response she would get, emails, comments. But I don't think people have learned to dial that down. They haven't actually learned the price yet of that kind of exposure.
And you know, certainly young people
ruin one's reputation, but you said, oh, well, this was something I got anonymously. But once you say it, it is so hard for a person to ever take that away from themselves. I hope you have a great sense of responsibility.
I wouldn't worry that much about the younger generation whose reputations are being trashed online, because
Good solid people can be ruined.
I think that the general public standards have changed too. The whole concept of what ruin means. You can have Paris Hilton who has sex on camera, a sex video which is viewed by tens of, if not hundreds of millions of people, who actually has had no. There's been no adverse consequence. I think the key is to. The shame is only the shame that you allow yourself to feel.
The president inhaled. This president inhaled and he got in. And you could say that means it's a lowering of our standards. Or Eric Schmidt said a few years ago that at a personal democracy forum that perhaps we should all at the age of 21 be able to change our names so we can start over. But the other way I look at it is there's a theory of mutual humiliation, right? Jason's done embarrassing things. I've done embarrassing things. Why go after him? Because then he'll go after mine. Okay. Onward.
But maybe it's going to make us more tolerant people. We'll look around, we'll see that everybody has flaws, everybody has scandals, everyone has affairs, everyone has sex tapes, everyone does drugs.
And it makes for great blogging.
What part were you at last night? I missed the drugs and sex at the Aspen Institute.
and none of it really matters.
Can you get rid of something that's on Facebook?
Not if somebody's taken a screenshot of it.